Imagine you've built a successful career or business. You're no longer trying to prove that you're capable because you've already done that. You have clients, you have opportunities, and enough success to know that you know what you're doing and what works. And yet, you know you're capable of doing more. And there's another level that you want to reach, but no matter how hard you work, it feels as though something is holding you back. What's interesting is that most people think the problem is external. They think they need better timing or a bigger network or another opportunity. So they keep looking for the next strategy, convinced that if they can just find that missing piece, everything else will fall into place. But what if the problem isn't outside of you at all? What if the behaviors that helped you become successful are now the very behaviors preventing you from becoming more successful? I'm Dr. Abby. I'm a behavioral scientist, a keynote speaker, and an author. I use my background in psychology and my experience training elite professionals around the world, including the US Secret Service, the FBI and Interpol, and Fortune 500 companies, to help you understand people better, make better decisions, and take control of building the life that you want. In this episode, we're going to talk about the success ceiling. This is the uncomfortable place where your external success has continued to grow, but your brain is still operating according to the rules that got you there. What we need to know about the brain is that it has no interest in helping you reach your potential. Its primary job is to keep you safe. One of the ways that it does this is by constantly trying to predict what will happen next. The more predictable your environment becomes, the more efficiently your brain can operate. Familiar routines, familiar responsibilities, familiar patterns of thinking all reduce uncertainty. And uncertainty is something that the brain naturally treats with caution. That is why starting something new can feel so uncomfortable. You're asking your brain to step into a future it cannot predict. But something even more interesting happens once you've achieved a degree of success. Now there is something to lose. You have built a reputation, you have an income, you have an identity that has become familiar to both you and the people around you. So without realizing it, your brain starts protecting this feeling of stability. And this is why the next level often feels harder than the first. It's basically your brain weighing the uncertainty of growth against the comfort of what it already knows. And I can see this pattern very clearly when I look back at my own career. For years, I said I wanted to take control of my life, build my platform, and create this show. This wasn't something I decided to do and then a few months later I did it. I've been sitting on this idea for years, but every time I got close to taking the first step, I found another reason to wait. I kept telling myself, I need to understand YouTube better. I need a clearer strategy. I need to know exactly what my brand was. I need my website finished. I needed my keynotes to be finished. And then I convinced myself I should wait until work became less busy. That's what makes a success ceiling so difficult to recognize, because it doesn't sound like I'm scared this won't work. It sounds like I'm just being sensible. And the brain is remarkably good at turning this discomfort into a sense of logic. It takes uncertainty and then it gives you a perfectly reasonable explanation for why today is not the day. Looking back, I was waiting to feel certain, and certainty is one thing growth can never give you in advance. You cannot feel certain about leading a larger business until you have led one. You cannot feel comfortable speaking on bigger stages until you've stood on those stages. You cannot think like the next version of yourself while you are still living as the current version of yourself. The very evidence your brain is waiting for can only exist after you have taken the step it's trying to convince you to delay. The mistake most people make at this point is assuming they need to work harder and keep pushing the same thing. If you have hit your success ceiling, working harder is rarely the answer. In fact, it often reinforces that same pattern that created the ceiling in the first place. If your instinct is to respond by taking on more, saying yes to more opportunities, or simply just pushing yourself further, you may be strengthening the habits that are keeping you where you are. The challenge is that every level of success asks something different of you. The person who builds a business is not necessarily the same person who scales that business. The person who manages a small team is not necessarily the same person who leads an organization. The person who earns a seat at the table is not the same person who knows how to use it. Growth is not simply about doing more of what has always worked. At some point, it can become about recognizing what no longer serves you. This is why I believe that breaking the success ceiling has so much to do with updating the way that you think, the way you behave, and ultimately the way you see yourself. If your brain is still operating according to yesterday's rules will continue producing yesterday's results. So we need to start asking ourselves, what does this next chapter require of me that the last one didn't? And one of the biggest misconceptions about high performance is that the people operating at the highest level simply just work harder than everybody else. Now, of course, they work hard, but that isn't what separates them. What separates them is the quality of their thinking. And the quality of their thinking depends on whether your brain has the space to think at all. When we're mentally overloaded, the brain naturally becomes more reactive. It narrows its thinking into whatever feels most urgent. And that's useful if your goal is simply just getting through the day. But it becomes a problem when you are trying to make decisions that shape the next 5 years of your life. And this is where I see so many successful people become trapped. They spend their entire day solving problems. And then because they're solving problems, they feel productive. But solving today's problems isn't necessarily moving tomorrow forward. Sometimes the most valuable hour you can spend isn't answering an email or taking another meeting or ticking off another task on your to-do list. Sometimes it's the hour where nothing appears to be happening because you're just simply thinking. You're connecting ideas or you're questioning your assumptions and you're trying to make sense of where you're actually trying to go. And that can feel very unproductive to a brain that has rewarded constant action. But at higher levels, thinking is the work. The second update is learning to behave like the person your next level requires. In the beginning, saying yes to everything probably served you very well. Being involved in every decision, solving every problem yourself, and moving very quickly were all advantages because your business needed your energy more than it needed your structure. Once a behavior has been rewarded enough times, the brain starts treating it as if it's the correct way to operate. It doesn't stop to ask whether the environment has changed. It simply repeats what worked before. And the same thing happens with identity. You can become the person that other people look to for leadership, whilst privately feeling like you're still trying to prove that you deserve to be there. And if deep down you still see yourself as the person trying to make it, you will continue behaving like that person, and you're going to hesitate when opportunities appear. You may over-explain your decisions and hold on too tightly to work you should have delegated. Or you might even keep chasing permission that nobody is actually expecting of you. And identity doesn't change because you decide that it changes. It changes because your behavior gives the brain new evidence. Every single time you set a boundary that your old self would not have set, every time you delegate instead of controlling, every time you make a decision without waiting for certainty, you are teaching your brain something about who you are. Eventually, that new version stops feeling uncomfortable. It simply just becomes you. If there is one thing I hope you take away from today's episode, it's this. Your success ceiling is not a reflection of your potential. It's a reflection of what your brain has learned to recognize as familiar, and that can change. Every time you choose the conversation you've been avoiding, every time you choose the opportunity you've been delaying, or make a decision you've been waiting to feel ready for, you're expanding what your brain considers as normal. So if you feel like you're hitting this ceiling, don't immediately ask yourself, how can I work harder? Instead, ask yourself, what part of me still belongs to the last chapter, and what can I do differently? If today's episode challenged the way you think, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. So until then, keep challenging conventional thinking. I'm Dr. Abby, and I'll see you next time.